The mahogany walls of Delacroix seemed to close in around them as crystal glasses caught the overhead lighting. Every patron in the upscale Manhattan steakhouse turned to stare as the sharp crack of palm against cheek echoed through the sudden silence. "How dare you embarrass me like this? Sarah!" Richard Morrison's voice cut through the air like a blade. His 45-year-old face twisted with rage that made him unrecognizable from the man she had married 20 years ago. Sarah Morrison stood frozen, her hand instinctively rising to her reddening cheek while the other protected her 6-month pregnant belly. At 37, she had weathered many storms in their marriage, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The baby kicked as if sensing her distress, and Sarah wondered if her unborn daughter could feel the shame burning through her veins. "Richard, please," she whispered, her voice trembling, but maintaining the dignity that had carried her through 2 decades of gradual erosion. "Not here. Not like this." But her millionaire ex-husband-to-be was beyond reason. His tech executive mind, so calculating in boardrooms, had snapped under the weight of his own guilt and paranoia. "You think I am stupid, Sarah? You think I do not know what you have been doing behind my back?" The restaurant manager approached their table with practiced discretion, but his concern was evident. "Sir, perhaps we could discuss this matter more privately." "Stay out of this," Richard snapped, never taking his cold blue eyes off his wife. "This woman has been lying to me for months, sneaking around, making secret phone calls, and now she wants to trap me with a baby that might not even be mine." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. 20 years of marriage, and this is how it ends, she thought. She, in front of strangers, with my unborn child as witness to her father's cruelty. 3 hours earlier, Sarah had been planning this anniversary dinner as a last attempt to save their marriage. She had found what she thought was an anniversary necklace hidden in Richard's coat pocket and allowed herself to hope that perhaps the late nights at the office really were just work stress. Perhaps the man who once wrote her love letters still existed somewhere beneath the stranger who now shared her bed. Now she understood the truth with crystal clarity. The necklace was not for her. The dinner was not a celebration. This entire evening was a performance, carefully orchestrated by a narcissistic abuser who needed an audience for his final act of destruction. "You are describing yourself, Richard," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying despite its softness. "Every accusation you are making, every behavior you are condemning, you are talking about yourself." Richard's face darkened further. "How dare you turn this around on me? I work 16-hour days to provide for this family while you sit at home, spending my money and plotting behind my back? Your money." Sarah's composure cracked slightly. "I gave up my career to support yours. I raised our home, managed our social obligations, and stood by your side through every business venture. That money was earned by both of us." The surrounding diners were no longer pretending to ignore the scene. Cell phones appeared discreetly as the drama unfolded, though none of them knew they were witnessing the public downfall of Richard Morrison, the tech millionaire whose company was about to lose 30% of its value within the next 12 hours. "And what about Amanda?" Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. "What about your 8-month affair with your 26-year-old assistant? What about the hotel receipts in the secret apartment and the money you have been transferring to her account?" Richard's confident facade cracked for just a moment, revealing the desperate man beneath. "You have been spying on me." "I have been protecting myself," Sarah replied, standing despite her pregnancy. "Something I should have started doing years ago, when you first began making me feel like I was not enough. When you started comparing me to other women, when you began this systematic campaign to make me question my own worth." The restaurant had fallen completely silent now. Even the kitchen sound seemed muted as staff and patrons alike witnessed this real-life drama that was more compelling than any streaming series. "You will not destroy me, Sarah," Richard hissed, his control slipping entirely. "I will not let you ruin everything I have built because you are too insecure to trust your own husband. I am not destroying you." "Richard," Sarah said with a clarity that surprised even her, "you destroyed yourself the moment you chose to betray our marriage vows. I am simply refusing to go down with your ship." That was when Richard Morrison, millionaire tech executive and pillar of Manhattan society, lost what remained of his composure. His hand rose in a swift arc that would end his reputation, his marriage, and ultimately his empire in a single moment of uncontrolled rage. The slap echoed through Delacroix restaurant like a gunshot, followed by a silence so complete that even the ambient city noise from the street seemed to pause in shock. Sarah Morrison touched her cheek and looked at her husband of 20 years. "Thank you, Richard," she said quietly. "You just showed everyone exactly who you really are." 12 hours earlier, Sarah had been sitting in her Upper East Side apartment kitchen, stirring honey into her morning tea while staring at her reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator. The woman looking back seemed like a stranger, worn down by months of gaslighting and emotional manipulation that had left her questioning her own perceptions. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maria Santos, her closest friend since college. "Mija, you sure about this dinner plan? That man has been treating you like a stranger for months?" Sarah typed back carefully. "Maria, we built a 20-year marriage together. Surely that means something. The baby deserves parents who fight for their family." But even as she sent the message, doubt gnawed at her. Richard had been different lately, distant in ways that went beyond normal work stress. The man who once surprised her with weekend getaways to the Hamptons now barely looked up when she entered a room. The passionate debates they used to have about everything from politics to restaurant choices had devolved into terse exchanges about household logistics. When Maria called an hour later, her warm Puerto Rican accent carried obvious concern. "Sarah, honey, I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer. When was the last time Richard made you feel beautiful?" The question hit like a physical blow because Sarah could not remember. "He has been under a lot of pressure at work," she said automatically, the excuse rolling off her tongue from months of practice. "That is not what I asked," Maria pressed gently. "When did he last tell you he loved you? When did he last ask about your day and actually listen to the answer? When did he last touch you like he wanted to? Not like he was doing you a favor?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her hand resting on her growing belly. The baby had been a surprise, conceived during one of Richard's rare moments of tenderness 3 months after her 37th birthday. She had hoped the pregnancy might bring them closer together, but instead it seemed to drive him further away. "I found something," Sarah finally admitted. A jewelry box hidden in his coat pocket, small, expensive. "I thought maybe he remembered our anniversary after all." "Oh, mija." Maria's voice was soft with sympathy she was trying to hide. "It could be for me," Sarah said quickly. "Maybe he is planning a surprise. Maybe tonight will be different." But they both knew it would not be different. Sarah had been making excuses for Richard's behavior for so long that she had forgotten what normal treatment looked like. The jewelry box was not for her, just as the late-night phone calls were not about work, and the business trips that had doubled in frequency were not all business. That afternoon, Sarah spent 2 hours getting ready for dinner. She chose a navy blue maternity dress that Richard had once complimented, styled her shoulder-length brown hair the way he preferred, and applied makeup carefully to hide the stress lines that had appeared around her eyes. Looking in the mirror, she tried to see herself through his eyes and felt a familiar pang of inadequacy. The woman she had been before marriage seemed like a character from someone else's life. Sarah Elizabeth Chen had graduated summa cum laude from Columbia with a degree in international relations. She had spoken 3 languages fluently and had been accepted to several prestigious graduate programs before she met Richard Morrison at a charity gala in 1998. He had been magnetic then, confident without being arrogant, successful without being condescending. He told her she was brilliant and beautiful, that she could have any future she wanted. Somehow, the future she wanted became entirely centered around supporting his ambitions. 20 years later, that brilliant woman felt buried under layers of compromise and diminished expectations. Sarah could not remember the last time she had expressed an opinion that differed from Richard's, could not recall the last book she had read that was not about pregnancy or home improvement. Her phone rang as she was applying lipstick. Richard's name appeared on the screen. "Sarah, I will be picking you up at 7:30, he said without preamble. "Wear something nice. We have reservations at Delacroix." "That sounds wonderful," she replied, trying to inject enthusiasm into her voice. "Should I meet you there instead? I know how busy you have been." "I said I would pick you up." His tone brooked no argument. "And Sarah, do not embarrass me tonight. I have colleagues who frequent that restaurant." The line went dead before she could respond. Sarah stared at her phone, Richard's words echoing in her mind. "Do not embarrass me," as if her mere existence was a potential source of shame. She thought about calling Maria back, about canceling the dinner, about confronting Richard directly about the changes in their marriage. Instead, she finished applying her lipstick and waited by the window for his car to arrive. Every woman who has ever felt trapped between hoping for the best and preparing for the worst knows this particular form of anxiety. Sarah Morrison spent that afternoon caught between the woman she used to be and the woman she was becoming, not yet understanding that the evening ahead would force her to choose which version of herself would survive. When Richard's black Mercedes pulled up to their building at exactly 7:30, Sarah gathered her purse and walked toward what she still hoped might be a new beginning, but what would actually be the end of everything she thought she knew about her life. The car ride to Delacroix was a masterclass in subtle psychological warfare, though Sarah would not recognize it as such until much later. Richard checked his phone 17 times during the 20-minute journey, each buzz and notification taking precedence over any attempt at conversation. "Busy day?" Sarah asked, trying to sound supportive rather than resentful. "You would not understand the complexities of running a tech company," Richard replied without looking up from his screen. "The Morrison Technologies merger requires constant attention to detail." Sarah bit back her response. She had an MBA from Wharton, had once consulted for Fortune 500 companies, but Richard had spent years convincing her that her intelligence was purely theoretical, lacking the practical application that real business required. His phone buzzed again, and Sarah caught a glimpse of the name on the screen. Amanda. Richard's thumb moved quickly to decline the call, but not before Sarah noticed the heart emoji next to the name. "Who is Amanda?" she asked casually, her voice carefully neutral. Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "My new executive assistant. Very efficient, very dedicated to the company's success." The way he said dedicated made Sarah's stomach clench, but she pushed the feeling down. "Pregnancy hormones make women paranoid," she told herself, repeating the phrase Richard had been using for months whenever she questioned anything about his behavior. They arrived at Delacroix just as the Manhattan evening was settling into its sophisticated rhythm. The restaurant buzzed with the energy of successful people celebrating their success, the clink of expensive wine glasses providing a soundtrack to conversations about stock options and vacation homes in the Hamptons. Richard was immediately in his element, nodding to acquaintances and subtly positioning their table so his profile would be visible to the maximum number of important people. Sarah recognized the performance, had watched him deploy it hundreds of times over the years at business dinners and charity galas. "You look beautiful tonight," he said once they were seated, but his eyes were scanning the room rather than focusing on her. "Thank you," Sarah replied, her hand moving instinctively to her belly. "The baby has been very active today. I think she is excited about our anniversary dinner." Richard's attention snapped back to her with sharp intensity. "The doctor said we could find out the gender next week if we wanted," Sarah explained. "I just have a feeling it is a girl. Call it mother's intuition." Richard's expression darkened. "Mother's intuition? Like when you were convinced I was having an affair last month. Your intuition seems rather unreliable lately." The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had never accused him of having an affair, had only asked about his increasingly frequent late nights and weekend work sessions. Richard's ability to reframe her legitimate concerns as paranoid delusions was perhaps his most refined skill. "I never said that," Sarah replied quietly. "You did not have to say it," Richard continued, his voice rising just enough to carry to nearby tables. "Your constant questioning, your jealousy, Your need to know where I am every minute of every day? It is suffocating. Sarah, no man wants to feel like he is under surveillance in his own marriage. Sarah looked around the restaurant and noticed that other diners were beginning to glance their way. This was not how anniversary dinners were supposed to go. But then again, nothing about their marriage had followed normal patterns for quite some time. I am not surveilling you, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I am trying to understand why you seem so unhappy, why you flinch when I touch you, why you work until midnight every night and spend weekends at the office. I miss my husband. Richard, I miss us. Richard's phone buzzed again. Amanda, this time he answered. Morrison here, he said, turning slightly away from Sarah. Yes, I can talk for a moment. Sarah sat in stunned silence as her husband took a business call during their anniversary dinner. She could hear a female voice on the other end, breathy and young, saying something about missing him and asking when he would be finished with his obligation. I will call you back in an hour, Richard said before hanging up. He turned back to Sarah as if nothing had happened. Where were we? Your assistant calls you on Saturday night, Sarah asked, her voice carefully controlled. Amanda is very dedicated, Richard repeated. She understands that success requires sacrifice. Something you seem to have forgotten since you stopped working. The barb was expertly delivered, designed to remind Sarah that she was financially dependent on him, that her contributions to their household were somehow less valuable than his. It was narcissistic abuse at its most sophisticated, delivered with the precision of a surgeon and the cruelty of someone who knew exactly where to cut deepest. Sarah thought about the woman she had been before marriage, the woman who had negotiated million-dollar contracts and commanded respect in boardrooms. That woman would never have tolerated being dismissed during her own anniversary dinner. But that woman had been systematically eroded, replaced by someone who had learned to apologize for having needs and to question her own perceptions when they conflicted with Richard's version of reality. I stopped working to support your career, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger despite her efforts to remain calm. We agreed that one of us should be available for travel and entertaining. We agreed that building your business was our priority. And I have been grateful, Richard replied with mock sincerity. But gratitude does not mean I should have to tolerate suspicion and accusations. Your insecurity is becoming a problem. Sarah, it is affecting my ability to focus on work. This was how conversations with narcissistic abusers always ended, Sarah would later learn. The victim's legitimate concerns were reframed as character flaws. Their requests for basic respect became evidence of their inadequacy. Richard had spent years training her to doubt her own judgment, to accept his version of reality even when it contradicted everything she could see and feel. But something was different tonight. Maybe it was the pregnancy hormones he kept blaming for her irrationality, or maybe it was the accumulated weight of months of gaslighting, but Sarah found herself unable to back down. My insecurity, she repeated, her voice carrying farther than she intended. Richard, you have not touched me with genuine affection in 6 months. You take phone calls from your assistant during our anniversary dinner. You stay out until midnight and refuse to explain where you have been. Any woman would have questions. Richard's face flushed with anger and embarrassment as he realized other diners were listening. This was not going according to his plan, Sarah would later realize. He had brought her to Delacroix to humiliate her in public, to create a scene that would justify whatever he had planned next. But she was supposed to be the one losing control, not him. Lower your voice, he hissed through clenched teeth. You are making a scene. I am making a scene. Sarah's composure finally cracked. You answer phone calls from other women during our anniversary dinner, and I am making a scene. That was when Richard Morrison, millionaire tech executive and master manipulator, realized that his carefully orchestrated evening was spiraling beyond his control. And that was when he decided to use the one weapon that had never failed him before Raw. Intimidating power designed to remind Sarah exactly who held all the cards in their marriage. His hand rose with calculated precision, and 20 years of marriage ended with a crack of palm against cheek that would echo through both their lives forever. 3 days after the slap heard around Manhattan's most exclusive steakhouse, Sarah Morrison sat in Maria Santos's cozy Brooklyn apartment, staring at a stack of photographs that told the story of her husband's betrayal in devastating detail. "Mija, you need to see all of it," Maria said gently, her warm brown eyes filled with the kind of compassion that comes from watching someone you love finally face an unbearable truth. Carmen got everything: hotel receipts, credit card statements, even audio recordings from the private investigator's surveillance. Carmen Rodriguez, a former NYPD detective turned private investigator, spread the evidence across Maria's kitchen table with the methodical precision of someone who had broken many hearts with similar revelations. At 48, Carmen had seen enough cheating spouses to recognize the pattern, but Richard Morrison's case stood out for its calculated cruelty. "Your millionaire ex-husband-to-be has been planning this for months," Carmen said, her Brooklyn accent cutting through any remaining illusions Sarah might have harbored. "The apartment he rented for Amanda Hayes is in his name. The credit cards, the bank transfers, even the vacation to Miami last month that he told you was a business conference. It was all documented, all traceable." Sarah picked up a photograph dated just 2 weeks earlier, Richard and Amanda entering the Peninsula Hotel, his hand possessively placed on the small of her back. Amanda Hayes looked exactly like Sarah had 20 years ago, young and ambitious and blissfully unaware that she was dating a man who viewed women as interchangeable accessories to his success. "She is 26, Sarah said quietly, studying Amanda's face. "The same age I was when I met Richard. And she will be 37 someday, just like you are now," Maria observed. "What do you think will happen to her then?" The pattern was so obvious now that Sarah wondered how she had missed it. Richard did not have affairs. He had recruitment cycles. Every few years, he found a younger version of whatever he thought he wanted, pursued her with the intensity that had once made Sarah feel like the most important woman in the world, then gradually began the process of diminishment that would eventually drive him to seek the next upgrade. "How long?" Sarah asked Carmen. "How long has this been going on?" 8 months, Carmen replied, consulting her notes. "Started right after your birthday party last year. Amanda Hayes was hired as his executive assistant in February, and the first hotel charge appears on his corporate card in March." Sarah remembered that birthday party, the elaborate celebration Richard had thrown for her 37th birthday. She had felt loved and celebrated, had actually begun to believe that they were entering a new phase of their marriage. Now she understood it had been a farewell party of sorts. Richard's final grand gesture before he began the process of replacing her. "There is more," Carmen continued, her voice careful. "Phone records show he has been in contact with a divorce attorney for 3 months. Marcus Steinberg, one of the most aggressive divorce lawyers in Manhattan. He specializes in protecting wealthy men's assets during contentious separations." The room fell silent as the full scope of Richard's betrayal became clear. While Sarah had been planning romantic anniversary dinners and hoping for reconciliation, her husband had been systematically preparing to destroy her financially and emotionally. "The pregnancy complicated his timeline," Carmen explained. "Text messages between Richard and Amanda show he wanted to file divorce papers immediately, but his lawyer advised waiting until after the baby was born to avoid looking like a complete monster in court." Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where their daughter was growing stronger every day. "He called the baby a trap," she remembered. "At the restaurant, he said I was trying to trap him with a baby that might not even be his. Classic narcissistic projection," said Linda Walsh, the divorce attorney Maria had recommended. Linda was 52, sharp as a blade, and had spent the last 15 years helping women extract themselves from marriages to powerful men who believed they were untouchable. "He accuses you of the manipulation he is practicing himself. It keeps you off balance and makes you question your own motives." Linda had arrived an hour earlier with a briefcase full of legal strategies and a reputation for taking down Manhattan's most arrogant husbands. Her track record included several high-profile cases where she had successfully argued that emotional abuse and infidelity constituted grounds for larger financial settlements. The public incident at Delacroix actually works in our favor, Linda continued. Video footage from multiple cell phones shows him striking a pregnant woman in public. That kind of documentation is worth millions in settlement negotiations. Sarah watched the video on Linda's tablet, seeing herself from the perspective of strangers who had witnessed her humiliation. But what surprised her was how dignified she looked, how calm and controlled her responses had been, even as Richard spiraled into rage. I do not remember being that composed, Sarah admitted. You were magnificent, Maria said firmly. You stood up for yourself in a way that made everyone in that restaurant understand exactly who was the victim and who was the abuser. The video had indeed gone viral, though not in the way Richard had intended. Within hours of the incident, social media had identified him as Richard Morrison, CEO of Morrison Technologies. The hashtag Millionaire Wife Slap had trended for 3 days, and his company's stock price had begun a steady decline that showed no signs of stopping. His business partners are distancing themselves, Carmen reported. 3 major clients have already canceled contracts, and the board of directors called an emergency meeting yesterday. Amanda Hayes submitted her resignation this morning, effective immediately. She is abandoning him, Sarah asked, surprised by her own disappointment. She had expected more loyalty from the woman who had helped destroy her marriage, even though she knew such loyalty was unrealistic. She is 26 and ambitious, Linda explained pragmatically. Dating a powerful CEO was one thing, but dating a disgraced has-been with a reputation for domestic violence is quite another. Women like Amanda Hayes do not go down with sinking ships. The irony was not lost on Sarah. She had spent 20 years loyally supporting Richard through every business failure and career setback, had sacrificed her own ambitions to build his empire, only to be discarded when he found someone younger and more exciting. Meanwhile, Amanda Hayes was already jumping ship at the first sign of trouble. What happens next? Sarah asked, looking around the table at the 3 women who had become her support system in the span of 72 hours. Next, we file for divorce and demand everything you are entitled to under New York state law, Linda said with satisfaction. Adultery, emotional abuse, and public humiliation add up to a very expensive settlement for Mr. Morrison. Next, we make sure you and your daughter are financially secure for the rest of your lives, added Rosemary Chen, the financial advisor Maria had brought in to protect Sarah's interests. Rosemary was 45, quietly fierce, and specialized in helping divorced women achieve financial independence. Next, we show your millionaire ex-husband what happens when he underestimates the power of women supporting women, Maria concluded, her voice carrying the strength of someone who had watched too many friends suffer in silence. Sarah looked around the table at these 4 women who barely knew her, but had rallied to her defense without hesitation. For 20 years, Richard had systematically isolated her from friends and family, had convinced her that she was too needy, too emotional, too difficult for anyone else to tolerate. Now she understood that the opposite was true. The problem had never been her inability to maintain relationships. It had been his need to control every aspect of her life, including her access to support systems that might have helped her recognize his abuse years earlier. Thank you, Sarah said quietly, the words carrying 20 years of suppressed gratitude for kindness she had been told she did not deserve. Thank us by building the life you want, Linda replied. Thank us by showing your daughter what strength looks like. As Sarah drove back to her Manhattan apartment that evening, she thought about the woman she had been that morning, afraid and uncertain, and still hoping for reconciliation. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone from another lifetime who had accepted crumbs and called them a feast. The evidence was overwhelming. The legal strategy was clear, and the support system was stronger than anything she had ever experienced. For the first time in months, Sarah Morrison felt something she had almost forgotten how to recognize: hope for a future that belonged entirely to her. The Upper East Side apartment that had once felt like a prison now buzzed with the energy of women planning a revolution. Sarah's living room had been transformed into a war room, with legal documents spread across the coffee table and laptops balanced on every available surface. The key is moving fast, Linda Walsh explained, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed asset statements. Men like Richard think they have all the time in the world to manipulate the system in their favor. We need to file papers before he realizes how much trouble he is really in. Rosemary Chen looked up from her financial analysis, her quiet voice carrying absolute authority. I have frozen the joint accounts we discussed. He cannot empty them without your signature now. Also, I found something interesting in the corporate filings for Morrison Technologies. Sarah leaned forward, still learning to trust her own curiosity after years of being told she would not understand business complexities. What kind of interesting... Your husband has been using company funds for personal expenses? Rosemary continued. The apartment he rented for Amanda Hayes, the hotel bills, even some of the jewelry purchases. That is corporate fraud, and it makes him vulnerable to criminal charges in addition to the divorce proceedings. Carmen Rodriguez grinned from her position by the window, where she was monitoring Richard's movements through a combination of social media and professional surveillance techniques. This gets better every hour. His business attorney called an emergency meeting this morning, and 3 board members have already demanded his resignation. What about Amanda? Sarah asked, surprised by her own concern for the young woman who had helped destroy her marriage. Amanda Hayes is currently job hunting, Carmen reported. Her LinkedIn profile went active yesterday, and she has been reaching out to headhunters all morning. Smart girl. She knows when to cut her losses. Maria Santos emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of coffee and homemade empanadas, her presence providing the emotional warmth that balanced the strategic coldness of their legal and financial planning. Mija, you need to eat, Maria said, setting a plate directly in front of Sarah. The baby needs nutrition, and you need strength for what is coming next. Sarah had barely eaten since the incident at Delacroix, her stomach churning with a combination of pregnancy hormones and emotional turmoil. But the familiar comfort of Maria's cooking reminded her that taking care of herself was no longer selfish. It was essential for her daughter's future. What is coming next? Sarah asked between bites. Richard is going to fight dirty, Linda explained matter-of-factly. Men like him always do when they realize they are losing control. He will try to paint you as unstable, vindictive, an unfit mother. He will claim the public incident was your fault, that you provoked him into defending himself. But we have witnesses, Sarah protested. We have video evidence. Evidence matters, but so does narrative, Linda continued. Richard has money and connections and a legal team that specializes in destroying women's credibility. We need to be prepared for him to attack your mental health, your parenting capacity, even your fidelity. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. After 20 years of marriage, Richard knew exactly which accusations would hurt most, which insecurities would make her question herself even when she knew he was lying. He has already started, Carmen added grimly. According to my sources, he has been telling colleagues that you have been acting irrationally since the pregnancy, that you have been accusing him of imaginary affairs, that you attacked him at the restaurant and he was just defending himself. Sarah felt the familiar wave of self-doubt that had kept her trapped for so long. What if people believed him? What if his version of events seemed more credible than hers? What if she really was as unstable and vindictive as he claimed Sarah? Look at me, Maria said firmly, taking her hands. I have known you for 15 years. You are the most stable, rational, compassionate person I know. You have never been vindictive about anything. Not even when that neighbor stole your parking space every day for 2 years. Richard is doing what abusers always do when they lose control, Linda added. He is trying to make you doubt your own perceptions. But we have documentation, we have witnesses, and we have a legal system that is finally starting to take emotional abuse seriously. More importantly, said Rosemary, we have financial leverage. Richard's company is hemorrhaging money and reputation. The board wants this scandal to disappear as quickly as possible, which means they want Richard to disappear. He needs a settlement more than we do. The women worked through the afternoon with the efficiency of a military operation. Linda drafted divorce papers that demanded 50% of all marital assets, plus spousal support and full custody of their unborn daughter. Rosemary created a detailed accounting of Richard's hidden assets and fraudulent expenses. Carmen documented every piece of evidence that supported their case. "This is not just about money," Linda explained as she prepared the final documents. "This is about sending a message to every powerful man who thinks he can destroy a woman and walk away unscathed. We are going to make Richard Morrison a cautionary tale." Sarah watched these women work on her behalf and felt something she had not experienced in years: the power of female solidarity. For too long, she had believed Richard's claims that other women saw her as competition, that friendships were temporary alliances based on social convenience. Now she understood that women supporting women was perhaps the most powerful force in the universe, capable of toppling empires built on misogyny and abuse. Every woman who had ever been told she was too emotional, too demanding, too difficult would recognize herself in Sarah's story and find strength in her victory. "What if he tries to take the baby?" Sarah asked, voicing her deepest fear. "He won not," Linda replied with absolute certainty. "Men like Richard want control, not responsibility. He has no interest in raising a child, especially a daughter who might grow up to be as strong as her mother. He wants to hurt you, but he also wants his freedom. And if he does try," Carmen added, "we will be ready. I have enough documentation of his emotional abuse and infidelity to convince any family court that he is an unfit parent." As evening fell over Manhattan, the four women finalized their strategy. Tomorrow morning, Linda would file divorce papers that would rock Richard's world. Rosemary would begin the process of securing Sarah's financial independence. Carmen would continue gathering evidence of Richard's misconduct. And Sarah would begin the process of rebuilding her life, not as someone's wife or victim, but as a woman who had faced down a powerful man's worst impulses and emerged victorious. "Thank you," Sarah said as the women prepared to leave. "I cannot believe strangers would do so much for someone they barely know." "We are not strangers," Maria replied with a smile. "We are sisters, and sisters protect each other, especially from men who think they can destroy us." That night, Sarah Morrison slept peacefully for the first time in months, her hand resting on her growing belly as she whispered to her daughter about the world they were building together. A world where women like Amanda Hayes learned to value themselves before they learned to betray other women, and where men like Richard Morrison discovered that their power had always been temporary, dependent on the silence of the women they tried to diminish. The sisterhood had risen, and tomorrow the real work would begin. The Monday morning after their war room session, Sarah woke to 17 missed calls from Richard and a voicemail that oscillated between rage and panic in ways that would have terrified her just a week earlier. "Sarah, you need to call me immediately," his recorded voice demanded. "My attorney says you have retained Linda Walsh. That woman is a reputation destroyer, a man-hating shark who specializes in false accusations. If you think you can extort money from me with lies and manipulations, you are gravely mistaken." Sarah deleted the message without listening to the rest and called Maria instead. "He got the papers," Sarah reported, surprised by how calm she sounded. "Good," Maria replied. "How do you feel?" Sarah considered the question carefully. How did she feel for months? The thought of Richard's anger had sent her into spirals of anxiety and self-doubt. Now, listening to his threats and bluster, she felt something unexpected: pity. "I feel sorry for him," she said finally. "He sounds desperate." "That is because he is desperate," Maria confirmed. "Carmen says his company stock dropped another 12% this morning. 3 more board members have called for his resignation." The transformation had been swift and brutal. In less than a week, Richard Morrison had gone from successful tech executive to cautionary tale about the consequences of public domestic violence. The viral videos from Delacroix had been shared millions of times, often accompanied by commentary about toxic masculinity and the abuse of pregnant women. Morrison Technologies released a statement this morning, Carmen reported when she called an hour later. They are conducting an internal investigation into allegations of corporate fund misuse and creating a hostile work environment. Translation: they are building a case to fire him for cause. Sarah found herself thinking about Amanda Hayes. the 26-year-old woman who had walked into Richard's office seeking career advancement and ended up as a supporting character in someone else's domestic drama. Had Amanda understood what she was getting involved in? Or had she believed Richard's claims that his marriage was already over? "I want to talk to her," Sarah said suddenly. Carmen was quiet for a moment. "That is not necessarily a good idea legally. Linda would probably advise against it." "I am not talking about legal strategy," Sarah clarified. "I am talking about one woman warning another about what Richard Morrison is really like." That afternoon, Sarah found herself sitting in a coffee shop in Midtown, waiting for a woman she had never met, but whose presence had defined her life for the past 8 months. Amanda Hayes arrived exactly on time, looking younger and more vulnerable than she had in the surveillance photos. "You're Sarah," Amanda said quietly, sliding into the booth across from her. "I am Sarah," Sarah confirmed. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me." Amanda looked exhausted, her usually perfect makeup slightly smudged and her blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "I resigned from Morrison Technologies," she said without preamble. "I thought you should know." "I heard," Sarah replied gently. "How are you handling everything?" The question seemed to surprise Amanda, who had clearly expected anger and accusations rather than genuine concern. "I am 26 years old and my career is probably over before it started," Amanda said, her voice breaking slightly. "Every Google search of my name brings up articles about the Morrison Technologies scandal. No one wants to hire the woman who helped destroy a tech executive's marriage." Sarah studied Amanda's face and saw herself 20 years earlier, ambitious and naive and completely unprepared for the reality of loving a narcissistic abuser. "He told you his marriage was already over, did not he?" Sarah asked. Amanda's eyes filled with tears. "He said you were just staying together for appearance's sake. He said you both knew it was finished, but neither of you wanted to deal with the hassle of divorce. He made it sound like I was helping him find happiness, not destroying a family." "That is exactly what he told the woman before you," Sarah said quietly. "And the woman before her. Richard does not have affairs, Amanda. He has recruitment cycles." "There were others." "There are always others," Sarah confirmed. "Richard gets bored every few years and finds a younger version of whatever he thinks he wants. He pursues her with intensity that makes her feel special and chosen, then gradually begins the process of diminishment that will eventually drive him to seek the next upgrade." Amanda was crying openly now, mascara running down her cheeks as she realized the full scope of her own manipulation. "I thought I loved him," she whispered. "I thought he loved me." "Richard does not love women," Sarah explained with the patience of someone who had learned this lesson the hard way. "He collects them. We are trophies to him, proof of his desirability and power. When we stop reflecting his image of himself as irresistible and successful, he trades us in for newer models." "What happens to me now?" Amanda asked. Sarah reached across the table and took the younger woman's hand. "Now you learn what I am learning, that our worth is not determined by men who see us as interchangeable, that we can build lives and careers and identities that belong to us alone." "I do not know how to do that," Amanda admitted. "Neither did I," Sarah replied. "But I am learning, and you can too. The difference is that you are 26, and you have your whole life ahead of you. I am 37 and pregnant and starting over from scratch." They talked for 2 hours, sharing stories about Richard's manipulation tactics and gradually understanding how systematically he had played them against each other. Sarah learned that Richard had told Amanda she was crazy and vindictive, that she had threatened to ruin him professionally if he tried to leave. Amanda learned that Richard had been planning the divorce for months while telling Sarah he wanted to work on their marriage. "He is a textbook narcissistic abuser," Sarah explained, using terminology Linda had taught her. "He creates chaos and confusion to maintain control. He makes each of us think we are the problem, while he is actually the source of all the dysfunction." When they finally parted ways, Amanda hugged Sarah tightly and whispered, "I am so sorry. I did not understand." "Neither did I," Sarah replied. "For 20 years I did not understand, but we understand now, and that makes us stronger than he ever expected us to be." That evening, Sarah called Linda to report on the meeting. "How do you feel about talking to her?" Linda asked. "Like I just saved a younger version of myself." Sarah replied, "Richard was already getting bored with Amanda. In another year or two, he would have found reasons to criticize and diminish her, just like he did to me. Now she knows what to watch for. And now she can testify about his manipulation tactics if we need her to," Linda added pragmatically. "Amanda Hayes just became a witness for our side instead of his." That night, Sarah Morrison went to sleep thinking about the women who would come after Amanda, the next generation of ambitious young professionals who might cross Richard's path. Thanks to the viral videos and media coverage, they would know what kind of man he really was. Her millionaire ex-husband's reputation for charm and success had been replaced by a reputation for abuse and exploitation. No amount of money or legal maneuvering could undo that kind of damage. The reckoning was just beginning. 2 weeks after the Delacroix incident, Richard Morrison sat in his corner office overlooking Central Park, watching his empire crumble in real time. The latest board meeting had been a massacre, with 7 of 9 members voting to accept his immediate resignation in exchange for avoiding a messy termination process. "Mr. Morrison," his secretary announced through the intercom, "Marcus Steinberg is here for your 3 o'clock. Marcus Steinberg, Manhattan's most ruthless divorce attorney, entered the office with the confidence of a man who specialized in destroying women's lives for billable hours. At 58, he had perfected the art of portraying wealthy men as victims of vindictive ex-wives seeking undeserved payouts." "Richard," Marcus said, settling into the leather chair across from Richard's desk, "we need to discuss damage control. The videos from the restaurant have created some challenges, but they are not insurmountable." "What kind of challenges?" Richard demanded, his patience already frayed from weeks of watching his reputation disintegrate on social media. "Public sympathy is entirely with your wife," Marcus explained bluntly. "A pregnant woman being struck in public does not play well with juries, especially when the aggressor is a millionaire. We need to shift the narrative." Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "We argue that Sarah has been mentally unstable throughout the pregnancy. Hormonal imbalances, depression, paranoid accusations about fictional affairs. We position you as a concerned husband trying to help a woman who was spiraling out of control." Richard leaned back in his chair, considering the strategy. It was exactly the kind of gaslighting that had worked on Sarah for years, but deploying it in court would require evidence and witnesses. "What about Amanda?" Richard asked. "Amanda Hayes submitted a sworn affidavit stating that you never had an inappropriate relationship with her." Marcus lied smoothly. "She described Sarah's accusations as delusional and concerning. The truth was that Amanda had refused to cooperate with Richard's legal team at all, but Marcus knew his client well enough to understand that Richard heard what he wanted to hear. The surveillance photos. Richard pressed. Business meetings. Marcus replied dismissively. Professional conferences. Perfectly innocent interactions that Sarah's pregnancy-addled mind interpreted as evidence of infidelity. Richard felt some of his confidence returning. This was familiar territory, the kind of reality manipulation that had allowed him to control Sarah for 2 decades. Surely a jury would be just as susceptible to his version of events? "What about the corporate fund misuse?" Richard asked. "Creative accounting," Marcus replied. "Executive perks that may have been improperly categorized but hardly constitute fraud. We paint it as a witch hunt by business rivals looking to capitalize on personal drama." Neither man mentioned that Morrison Technologies had already fired Richard and was cooperating fully with both civil and criminal investigations into his financial misconduct. Richard's ability to deny inconvenient facts was matched only by Marcus's willingness to encourage those delusions for $3,000 per hour. "Timeline," Richard asked. "We file counter motions next week," Marcus explained. "Custody challenges based on mental instability. Asset protection based on Sarah's vindictive behavior. By the time we are finished, she will be lucky to get supervised visitation with her own child." Richard smiled for the first time in weeks. This was why he paid Marcus Steinberg premium rates, for his ability to turn any situation to his client's advantage regardless of facts or ethics. "What about the media attention?" Richard asked. "Media attention fades," Marcus replied. "In 6 months, no one will remember the restaurant incident. What they will remember is a successful businessman who refused to be extorted by a mentally unstable ex-wife." Richard stood and walked to his window, looking down at the city that had once treated him as a conquering hero. Soon enough, he would reclaim his position, would show Sarah and everyone else that Richard Morrison was not so easily defeated. What Richard did not know was that Carmen Rodriguez had been monitoring his phone calls for weeks, that every conversation with Marcus Steinberg was being recorded and analyzed by Linda Walsh's legal team. His strategy of portraying Sarah as mentally unstable would backfire spectacularly when presented alongside evidence of his systematic emotional abuse. What Richard also did not know was that Amanda Hayes had spent the morning with Linda Walsh, providing detailed testimony about his manipulation tactics and fraudulent expense accounts. Her sworn statement directly contradicted every claim Marcus had made about their relationship. Most importantly, Richard did not understand that the woman he had trained to doubt herself no longer existed. Sarah Morrison had spent the past 2 weeks surrounded by a support system that reinforced her strengths rather than her weaknesses, that validated her perceptions rather than distorting them. The man who walked into Delacroix restaurant that night 3 weeks ago had expected to destroy his wife's credibility with a carefully orchestrated public scene. Instead, he had created evidence of his own abusive behavior that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Richard Morrison was about to learn that 20 years of psychological manipulation could not overcome 2 weeks of women supporting women in their shared commitment to justice and financial independence. His millionaire ex-husband status was about to become very expensive indeed. The sharp crack of palm against cheek echoed through Delacroix restaurant like a gunshot, followed by a silence so complete that even the kitchen sound seemed to fade into shocked stillness. Sarah Morrison stood frozen, her hand rising instinctively to her reddening cheek while the other protectively cradled her 6-month pregnant belly. Around them, crystal glasses caught the overhead lighting as every patron turned to stare at the unthinkable scene unfolding before them. 20 years of marriage, Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying despite its softness. And this is how you choose to end it? With violence against your pregnant wife in front of strangers? Richard Morrison's face flushed with rage and embarrassment as he realized that his carefully orchestrated public humiliation had backfired spectacularly. Cell phones were already appearing, recording the aftermath of his loss of control. "You brought this on yourself," he hissed, his voice low but audible to nearby tables. "Your constant accusations, your paranoid delusions, your need to destroy everything I have built." The restaurant manager approached their table with practiced discretion, but his concern was evident. "Sir, I need to ask you to leave immediately. We do not tolerate violence against women in our establishment." "This is a private matter," Richard snapped, never taking his eyes off Sarah. "My wife has been making false accusations about my business conduct and personal relationships. She attacked my reputation, and I defended myself." Sarah looked at her husband of 20 years and saw him clearly for perhaps the first time in their marriage. The charm that had once attracted her was revealed as manipulation. The confidence she had admired was actually narcissistic entitlement. The successful businessman she had supported was a fraud who embezzled corporate funds to support his affairs. "You defended yourself," Sarah repeated, her voice growing stronger. "Richard, you just struck a pregnant woman in public because she asked about your 8-month affair with your 26-year-old assistant?" The words carried across the restaurant's hushed atmosphere like a breaking news announcement. Phones continued to appear as diners realized they were witnessing something that would trend on social media within hours. "I am not having an affair," Richard lied desperately. "You are having a psychotic break brought on by pregnancy hormones. You need professional help." Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope that Carmen Rodriguez had prepared for exactly this moment. She spread surveillance photographs across their white tablecloth like playing cards. each image documenting Richard's betrayal with devastating clarity. "Hotel receipts," Sarah announced calmly, holding up documentation for the surrounding tables to see. "Credit card statements showing payments to Amanda Hayes' apartment. Text messages discussing your plans to divorce me after the baby is born, so your child would not be illegitimate." Richard's confident facade cracked completely as he stared at evidence he had never expected Sarah to possess. "Where did you get those? You have been spying on me illegally." "I have been protecting myself legally," Sarah corrected. "Something I should have started doing years ago when you began your systematic campaign to make me question my own worth and sanity." A woman at a nearby table pulled out her phone and began recording openly. "This is Sarah Morrison," she announced to her camera, "wife of tech executive Richard Morrison, who just slapped her in public for exposing his affair." "Stop recording," Richard demanded, turning his fury on the innocent bystander. "This is harassment. This is documentation," the woman replied coolly. "And this is going viral within the hour." Sarah stood carefully, her pregnancy making the movement slow and deliberate. Every eye in the restaurant followed her as she gathered the scattered photographs and returned them to their envelope. "I am done being your victim, Richard," she announced with a clarity that surprised even her. "I am done accepting your version of reality when it contradicts everything I can see and feel. I am done apologizing for having needs and questioning my own perceptions when they conflict with your lies." "You are making the biggest mistake of your life," Richard threatened, his voice rising. "I will destroy you in court. I will take everything, including that baby. You will have nothing when I'm finished with you." "I already have nothing," Sarah replied calmly. 20 years of marriage to you has taught me that nothing is better than the illusion of something built on manipulation and abuse." The restaurant erupted in spontaneous applause as Sarah Morrison walked steadily toward the exit, her head held high despite the red mark on her cheek. Behind her, Richard sat alone at their anniversary table, surrounded by evidence of his betrayal and the judgment of strangers who had witnessed his true character. "Ma'am," the restaurant manager called after Sarah. "Should we call the police? Do you need medical attention?" "Thank you," Sarah replied, "but I have everything I need. This man just provided me with all the evidence required to ensure my daughter grows up understanding that no woman should ever accept being treated this way." Outside Delacroix, Sarah called Maria Santos with hands that barely trembled. "Mija, I saw it on Instagram already," Maria said before Sarah could speak. "Carmen is on her way to pick you up. Linda is preparing emergency motions for tomorrow morning. We have got you." As Sarah waited for her ride, she thought about the woman who had walked into that restaurant 2 hours earlier, still hoping for reconciliation and willing to accept responsibility for Richard's behavior. That woman felt like a character from someone else's life now. The woman walking out of Delacroix was someone new, someone who had finally understood that her worth was not determined by a man who saw her as interchangeable. Someone who was building a life and identity that belonged to her alone. Richard Morrison's empire would continue crumbling over the coming months, but Sarah's transformation was already complete. The slap that was meant to silence her had become the moment she found her voice, and that voice would echo through the lives of every woman who recognized herself in Sarah's story and found strength in her courage. The sisterhood had claimed another victory, and the reckoning was far from over. 3 months after the slap heard around Manhattan, Sarah Morrison stood in the delivery room of Mount Sinai Hospital, holding her newborn daughter and feeling a completeness she had never known was possible. "Emma Grace Morrison," she whispered to the tiny face looking up at her with dark eyes that held infinite possibility. "Your last name for now, but your strength is all your own." Maria Santos stood beside the hospital bed with tears streaming down her face, having served as Sarah's labor coach through 12 hours of intense contractions and emotional release. "She is perfect, Mija," Maria said softly. "Absolutely perfect. And look at you, bringing life into the world while building a new life for yourself. You are magnificent." The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of legal victories and personal transformation that exceeded even Linda Walsh's optimistic projections. Richard's attempt to portray Sarah as mentally unstable had backfired catastrophically when presented alongside Amanda Hayes' testimony about his manipulation tactics and Carmen Rodriguez's documentation of his systematic emotional abuse. The divorce settlement is final, Linda announced when she arrived at the hospital an hour after Emma's birth. 50-50 split of all marital assets, plus spousal support for 10 years, plus a college fund for Emma that he cannot touch. The viral videos from Delacroix made his legal team desperate to settle rather than face a jury trial. Sarah looked down at her daughter and calculated the numbers that would define their future. $2.4 million, plus the Manhattan apartment, plus monthly support payments that would ensure Emma never experienced the financial dependence that had trapped her mother for so long. "What about Morrison Technologies?" Sarah asked. "Collapsed entirely," Linda reported with satisfaction. "The board fired him for cause 3 weeks ago, and the SEC investigation resulted in criminal charges for corporate fraud. Richard will spend the next 2 years in minimum security prison, though he will probably serve only 8 months with good behavior." Sarah felt a surprising absence of satisfaction at news of Richard's downfall. The man who had dominated her life for 20 years seemed irrelevant now, a cautionary tale from someone else's story rather than the central figure in her own narrative. "And Amanda," Sarah asked. "Amanda Hayes is working for a nonprofit that helps women transition out of abusive relationships?" Carmen reported from her position by the window. "She gives presentations about recognizing manipulation tactics in professional environments. Apparently, your conversation with her was life-changing." Sarah smiled, remembering the young woman's tears and confusion in that Midtown coffee shop. Saving Amanda from Richard's recruitment cycle felt more meaningful than any financial settlement or legal victory. "There is something else," Linda continued. "The Morrison Technologies scandal has inspired legislation in Albany. The Sarah Morrison Act will provide enhanced legal protections for pregnant women facing domestic violence and financial abuse." Emma Grace Morrison had been born into a world where her mother's courage was already changing laws and inspiring other women to demand better treatment from the men in their lives. Sarah's story had become a catalyst for broader conversations about narcissistic abuse and the importance of financial independence. "I have been thinking about what comes next," Sarah said, adjusting Emma's blanket. "I want to start a consulting business helping women navigate financial independence after divorce. Too many women stay in bad marriages because they do not understand their options." "The Morrison Consulting Group," Maria suggested with a grin. "Using your name and reputation to help other women the way Linda and Carmen and Rosemary helped you." Sarah considered the possibility of transforming her own trauma into a tool for helping others. The woman who had once felt too broken to leave an abusive marriage could become the woman who showed other victims that escape was not only possible, but profitable. "We would need office space," Sarah mused. "I know a place," Carmen offered. "My cousin has a building in Midtown with reasonable rates and good security, perfect for women who might need to meet discreetly while planning their exits." The conversation was interrupted by Sarah's phone buzzing with another interview request. In the months since Delacroix, she had become a reluctant media figure, with journalists from major publications wanting to discuss her transformation from victim to victor. "Good Morning America wants to do a follow-up segment," Sarah read from her screen. 6 months later. "How is life different?" "Will you do it?" Linda asked. Sarah looked down at Emma, who was sleeping peacefully despite the chaos of conversation around her. "I think so. Every woman who sees that interview might recognize something in her own relationship that she needs to change." The ripple effects of Sarah's public awakening continued expanding in ways she never could have anticipated. Morrison Technologies had become a business school case study about the intersection of personal misconduct and corporate responsibility. The hashtag Millionaire Wife Slap had evolved into broader discussions about economic abuse and financial literacy for women. "Richard called this morning," Carmen reported quietly. "From prison. He wants to talk to you about visitation rights when he gets out." Sarah felt Emma's tiny fingers curl around her own and knew exactly what her answer would be. "Emma will never know a father who thinks violence is an appropriate response to being challenged. When she is old enough, I will tell her about him, but he will have to earn the right to be part of her life." "And if he does not earn it," Maria asked. Then she will grow up knowing that sometimes the most loving thing a mother can do is protect her child from people who are incapable of healthy relationships, even when those people share her DNA. The room fell quiet as the women contemplated a future where Emma Grace Morrison would never experience the systematic diminishment that had defined her mother's early adulthood. She would grow up watching her mother build a successful business, maintain meaningful friendships, and refuse to accept anything less than full respect from the men she chose to date. "What will you tell her about marriage?" Linda asked. Sarah considered the question carefully. "I will tell her that marriage should be a partnership between equals, not a transaction where women trade independence for security. I will tell her that any man who tries to isolate her from friends and family is showing her exactly who he is, and she should believe him the first time. And I will tell her that women supporting women is the most powerful force in the universe," Maria added with conviction. As evening fell over Manhattan, Sarah Morrison sat in her hospital bed surrounded by the sisterhood that had saved her life, holding the daughter who represented everything good about her future. The millionaire ex-husband who had tried to destroy her was spending his first night in prison, while she was spending her first night as a mother who would never teach her child to accept crumbs and call them love. Emma Grace Morrison's first hours on Earth were marked not by traditional nuclear family dynamics, but by the revolutionary idea that women could create their own definitions of success, security, and happiness without requiring male approval or financial dependence. The reckoning was complete, and the new chapter was just beginning. 1 year after Emma Grace Morrison took her first breath, Sarah stood in the conference room of Morrison Consulting Group, looking out at 12 women who had found their way to her through referrals, media coverage, and the kind of underground network that forms when women refuse to suffer in silence. "Today we are going to talk about hidden assets," Sarah announced to the group, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned these lessons the hard way. "Men like our ex-husbands are experts at making money disappear when divorce becomes inevitable." Around the polished conference table sat women from every background imaginable, united by their shared experience of discovering that the men they trusted most had been systematically preparing to betray them. A surgeon married to a hedge fund manager, a teacher married to a real estate developer, a social worker married to a corporate attorney. "Sarah," asked Jennifer Walsh, a 42-year-old pharmaceutical scientist, "how did you know to start gathering evidence before filing papers?" Sarah smiled, remembering her own naivety just 18 months earlier. "I did not know. I got lucky because I had friends who understood what I was facing and connected me with professionals who specialized in protecting women's interests." The Morrison Consulting Group had grown from Sarah's informal conversations with other divorce survivors into a comprehensive support system that combined legal strategy, financial planning, and emotional counseling. Linda Walsh served as the legal consultant, while Carmen Rodriguez provided investigative services and Rosemary Chen handled financial analysis. "The key is understanding that you are not crazy, you are not vindictive, and you are not asking for too much," Sarah continued. "Narcissistic abusers excel at making their victims question their own perceptions and lower their expectations. Our job is to remind you what normal treatment looks like." Through the conference room windows, Sarah could see Central Park, where Emma was spending the afternoon with Maria Santos while her mother worked to build a legacy of female empowerment and financial independence. At 13 months old, Emma was already walking, already showing the fearless curiosity that comes from growing up in an environment where her needs are prioritized and her potential is celebrated. "What about custody issues?" asked Rebecca Martinez, a marketing executive whose husband had threatened to claim she was an unfit mother due to her travel schedule. "Family courts are finally starting to recognize emotional abuse as grounds for restricted custody," Sarah explained. "Document everything. Record conversations when legally permissible. Build a case that shows the pattern of manipulation and control." Sarah's own custody arrangement had become the template for other high-conflict divorces involving narcissistic abusers. Richard had been granted supervised visitation rights after his release from prison, but Emma seemed to instinctively recoil from his energy during their monthly meetings. At 13 months old, She was already demonstrating the healthy boundary setting that her mother had taken 37 years to learn. The latest update on Morrison Technologies asked Patricia Kim, a former Morrison employee who had discovered that her own husband was embezzling from his architectural firm. Completely dissolved, Sarah reported. The assets were liquidated to pay back investors and cover legal settlements. Richard's personal brand never recovered from the viral videos, and no tech company would hire someone synonymous with domestic violence. The irony was not lost on Sarah that Richard's attempt to publicly humiliate her had instead destroyed his own reputation while elevating hers. The viral videos that were supposed to portray her as unstable and vindictive had instead shown the world a dignified woman standing up to an abusive man twice her size. "I have been thinking about remarriage," admitted Carol Thompson, a 60-year-old widow whose second husband had hidden gambling debts and extramarital affairs for 3 years. "How do you learn to trust again?" Sarah considered the question that haunted every woman who had escaped an abusive relationship. "I think trust should be earned gradually, through consistent actions rather than grand gestures. And I think we should trust ourselves first, our own instincts and judgments, before we trust anyone else with our hearts or our financial security." The conversation was interrupted by Sarah's assistant announcing that Emma had arrived for their afternoon together. At 13 months old, Emma Grace Morrison commanded attention the moment she entered any room, her dark eyes bright with intelligence and her smile radiating the confidence that comes from unconditional love. "Mama," Emma called out, taking unsteady but determined steps across the conference room toward her mother. Sarah scooped up her daughter and felt the familiar rush of purpose that had defined the past year. Every legal victory, every successful client consultation, every media interview about women's financial rights was ultimately about creating a world where Emma would never accept being diminished by anyone. "This is why we fight," Sarah said to the women around the table, most of whom were mothers themselves. "Not just for ourselves, but for the next generation of women who will grow up understanding their worth from day one." Cheery. The meeting concluded with individual consultation appointments, where Sarah reviewed each woman's specific situation and connected them with appropriate legal and financial resources. The Morrison Consulting Group had handled 47 divorce cases in its first year, with an average settlement increase of 68% compared to women who navigated the process without specialized support. As the conference room emptied, Sarah remained at the window with Emma, looking out at the city that had once felt like a prison, but now represented unlimited possibility. "What do you think, baby girl?" Sarah asked her daughter. "Should we go to the park and celebrate another successful day of helping women claim their power?" Emma clapped her hands and babbled something that sounded remarkably like yes, though Sarah knew she was probably imagining the sophisticated vocabulary. That evening, as Sarah tucked Emma into her crib in their renovated Upper East Side apartment, she reflected on the transformation that had begun with a slap and culminated in a life neither of them could have imagined 18 months earlier. The apartment that had once felt like a showcase for Richard's success now reflected Sarah's own aesthetic and priorities. Bookshelves filled with literature about women's rights and financial independence, artwork created by female artists, photographs of Emma with her chosen family of strong women who had proven that sisterhood was indeed the most powerful force in the universe. "Someday you will read this story, Emma," Sarah whispered to her sleeping daughter, "and you will understand that your mother's greatest gift to you was refusing to accept less than she deserved. You will grow up knowing that you never have to choose between love and respect, between security and independence, between being a good woman and being a strong woman." Emma stirred slightly in her sleep, and Sarah wondered if children could absorb wisdom through dreams, if the values spoken over their sleeping forms somehow became part of their cellular structure. The reckoning that had begun at Delacroix Restaurant was now a living legacy, spreading through the lives of every woman who recognized herself in Sarah's story and found courage to demand better treatment from the world. Richard Morrison's empire had crumbled, but the empire Sarah was building would endure for generations. As she turned off the nursery light and walked toward her own bedroom, Sarah Morrison smiled at the woman reflected in the hallway mirror. That woman looked nothing like the frightened, diminished person who had walked into Delacroix restaurant hoping to save a marriage that was already beyond salvation. This woman looked like someone who had learned to value herself appropriately. Someone who had discovered that the best chapter of her life was just beginning. Someone who understood that true strength comes not from never falling down, but from refusing to stay down when powerful men try to keep you there. The millionaire ex-husband who had tried to destroy her was spending his second year in obscurity and debt, while she was building an empire of female empowerment that would outlast any individual man's attempt to diminish its power. Emma Grace Morrison's first steps had been taken not toward her father, but toward her mother, toward the woman who had chosen courage over comfort, truth over safety, and self-respect over silence. And in that choice, she had given her daughter the greatest gift possible, a mother who would never teach her to accept anything less than everything she deserved. The story that began with narcissistic abuse had become a testament to the transformative power of women supporting women, and the legacy would continue growing with every woman who found strength in Sarah's courage and chose to write her own ending instead of accepting the one someone else had planned for her.